Are you ready for a deep dive into something most people shy away from discussing? Imagine this: everything you've been told about aging and the importance of family might not be the whole truth. What if moving closer to your children in your golden years, a decision many of us make with the hope of finding comfort and care, could actually lead to more isolation and disappointment? In today's video, we're going to challenge these beliefs and uncover hidden truths about old age, family dynamics, and what it really means to find peace. With insights drawn from Zen, Buddhism, and real-life experiences, we'll explore how our expectations of those we love can sometimes set us up for heartache rather than harmony. This isn't just another story about aging, this is a journey that could completely transform how you view relationships, happiness, and the path to inner peace. So, stay with me until the end. You might just walk away with a fresh perspective on life, one that brings you closer to true fulfillment, no matter your age. Chapter 1: The Dream of a Happy Old Age. Most of us grow up believing that family is our greatest source of comfort. We spend decades raising our children, working hard to give them the best opportunities, and hoping that one day, when we are old and frail, they will return this love and care. It seems like a natural cycle, one generation caring for the next, only to be cared for in return. Take the story of Warren Buffett, one of the wealthiest and most influential investors in history. Despite his immense fortune, Buffett has always emphasized independence, even in family matters. He famously chose not to leave his children vast inheritances, believing that true success comes from self-reliance rather than dependence on others. This philosophy mirrors the teachings of Buddhism and Stoicism. Happiness must be cultivated from within, not expected from external sources. Similarly, consider Mr. Lin, a retired schoolteacher who spent his entire life educating children and raising his own. After decades of hard work, he decided to move closer to his son in hopes of enjoying a peaceful retirement. He imagined warm family dinners, laughter with his grandchildren, and a renewed sense of purpose in his final years. At first, everything seemed perfect. His son welcomed him with open arms. His grandchildren adored him, and he felt reassured that he had made the right choice. But as time passed, cracks began to appear. His son, caught up in the pressures of his career, had less time to visit. His grandchildren, once eager to see him, became more preoccupied with school, friends, and technology. Slowly, the sense of belonging he once felt began to fade. The warm dinners became occasional takeout nights, and the laughter that once filled the house was replaced by silence. This pattern is not unique to Mr. Lin. Even Elon Musk, a man who revolutionized industries, has spoken about the emotional distance that can develop within families due to life's demands. Despite having multiple children, his relentless pursuit of innovation has meant limited time for deep family bonding. His story serves as a reminder that proximity does not guarantee closeness. For Mr. Lin, the painful realization set in: living near his family did not automatically mean he was an integral part of their lives. Instead of the close-knit, loving household he envisioned, he found himself feeling like an outsider in a place that was supposed to bring him comfort. This brings us to an important question: is our expectation of family in old age based on reality, or an illusion that ultimately leads to suffering? Chapter 2: The Illusion of Security. The joy of living close to his family faded as Mr. Lin noticed subtle changes. His son and daughter-in-law, once enthusiastic about having him nearby, started to get busier. At first, they tried to include him in family activities, but work, social commitments, and their children's needs took priority. Visits became less frequent. Calls were met with, "I'll get back to you later." Suddenly, Mr. Lin found himself sitting alone in his apartment, waiting for companionship that never arrived. The warmth he longed for turned into silence. He had uprooted his life to be near his family. But despite the physical closeness, he felt more distant than ever. This is not just Mr. Lin's story, this is the reality for millions of elderly parents worldwide. But why does this happen? 1. The changing priorities of modern life. In today's fast-paced world, family dynamics have shifted. Unlike in past generations, where multiple generations lived together and elderly parents were deeply integrated into daily life, modern families function differently. Economic pressures, career ambitions, and the demands of raising children leave little time for parents to focus on their aging elders. Take Bill Gates, for example. As one of the most powerful figures in technology and philanthropy, he has spoken openly about the sacrifices required to build Microsoft and run the Gates Foundation. His work often took precedence over personal relationships, including time with family, while his children had the privilege of wealth. Time, a truly limited resource, was something even he couldn't create more of. This same principle applies to everyday families. Children who once relied on their parents for guidance now find themselves consumed by work obligations, raising their own families, and managing personal stress. Aging parents, once the center of their children's lives, slowly move to the background. 2. The burden of unspoken expectations. Mr. Lin expected that by moving closer to his children, he would be embraced into their lives. He assumed that proximity would automatically lead to emotional closeness. But he never considered whether his children had the same expectation. Many parents unknowingly place a psychological burden on their children. The thought of constantly caring for an elderly parent, balancing work, personal life, and parental duties can feel overwhelming. Even when children deeply love their parents, they may feel guilty for not giving them the attention they deserve. This guilt often results in avoidance, leading to even more emotional distance. A powerful example of this is Barack Obama. During his presidency, he often spoke about the guilt he felt for missing key moments in his daughters' lives due to the demands of leadership. Despite his deep love for his family, his responsibilities as a leader meant his time was limited. Similarly, adult children today often struggle with the emotional conflict between love and obligation. 3. The myth that family alone brings fulfillment. Many elderly parents believe that family should be the primary source of their happiness in old age. But this belief often leads to disappointment. The Buddha taught that attachment leads to suffering. And nowhere is this more evident than in the expectations we place on family relationships. Consider Warren Buffett's philosophy. Despite being one of the wealthiest individuals in the world, he never raised his children to expect financial dependence. He believed that everyone must forge their own path, and that true success comes from self-sufficiency, not reliance on others. The same logic applies to emotional well-being in old age. True peace comes from within, not from external relationships. Breaking the illusion. For Mr. Lin, the realization was painful but necessary. His happiness could not be dependent on his children. Living near them did not guarantee emotional connection. The security he sought was an illusion. If he wanted true peace, he had to cultivate it himself. This raises an important question: how can one find fulfillment in old age without relying on family? Chapter 3: The Weight of Expectations. One of the greatest sources of suffering in life is expectation. Mr. Lin, like many elderly parents, had unknowingly placed the burden of his happiness on his children. He had spent decades working hard, making sacrifices, and prioritizing his family's well-being over his own. In return, he assumed his children would naturally reciprocate his care in old age. But life doesn't work that way. His son had his own responsibilities, a demanding career, children to raise, and financial obligations to manage. It wasn't that he didn't love his father, it was simply that life demanded his attention elsewhere. Mr. Lin's pain came not from outright neglect but from the contrast between his expectations and reality. He had imagined a retirement filled with warmth, shared meals, and the constant presence of family. Instead, he found himself alone. This phenomenon is universal. Many powerful figures have experienced a similar emotional struggle. Take Steve Jobs, for example. Despite revolutionizing technology and leaving an undeniable legacy, his personal relationships were often strained, especially with his daughter Lisa. While he may have expected deep familial bonds, the reality of his choices and priorities led to a more complex and distant connection. Likewise, aging parents often fail to recognize that while they sacrificed for their children, those children now have their own paths to follow. There is an unspoken belief that love and sacrifice automatically guarantee the same in return. However, life does not operate on a transactional basis. Consider Elon Musk, a man whose work ethic and ambition have reshaped industries. His relentless drive to innovate has come at the cost of personal relationships. His multiple marriages and limited time with his children demonstrate a harsh truth: people prioritize what demands their energy the most. Mr. Lin had believed that because he had dedicated his life to his children, they would dedicate theirs to him. But modern realities make this expectation unrealistic. This is where the teachings of the Buddha offer profound wisdom. Attachment is the root of suffering. Mr. Lin's suffering wasn't caused by his son's actions. It was caused by his own attachment to the idea that his children owed him time, care, and attention. This is a difficult truth to accept, but one that brings liberation. When we expect others to act a certain way, we give them power over our emotions. When they fail to meet those expectations, we feel betrayed, hurt, or resentful. Great leaders throughout history have understood this. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher, constantly reminded himself that he could not control others, only his own reactions. He accepted that life was unpredictable and that expectations only led to disappointment. Mr. Lin had two choices: cling to his expectations and continue feeling abandoned, or release his attachment and find peace within himself. The second path required him to shift his mindset. Instead of expecting his son to fulfill his emotional needs, he needed to cultivate new sources of joy and purpose, whether through community, self-discovery, or personal projects. Warren Buffett, one of the world's wealthiest men, once said that true happiness comes from doing what you love, not from relying on others to make you happy. He lives a relatively simple life, still residing in the same modest house he bought decades ago, because he understands that contentment is a mindset, not a gift from others. Mr. Lin's story is a reminder that happiness is an inside job. Expecting others to be the sole source of our fulfillment only leads to disappointment. True peace comes when we let go of attachment and find meaning within ourselves. Chapter 4: The Dangers of Dependence. When we depend on others for our emotional well-being, we become vulnerable to disappointment. Take the story of Madame Jeanne, a woman in her late 70s, who moved in with her daughter after her husband passed away. She assumed that by being close to family, she would never feel lonely again. But instead of feeling cherished, she felt like an outsider. Her daughter loved her, but she had a demanding job and young children to raise. Jeanne, once an independent woman, now relied entirely on her daughter's attention for emotional fulfillment. Every missed meal together, every moment her daughter was too busy to talk, felt like rejection. She wasn't just losing her connection with her daughter, she was losing herself. Jeanne's story is not unique. Emotional dependence creates suffering because it ties our happiness to factors beyond our control. When we rely on others for validation, love, or a sense of purpose, we place our peace in their hands. Even the most powerful figures have struggled with this. Take Princess Diana. Despite her global fame and admiration, she often felt emotionally isolated. Her marriage to Prince Charles was filled with unmet expectations, and her deep longing for emotional connection left her feeling abandoned. No amount of status or love from others can fill the void that comes from losing oneself. Buddhism teaches that true peace comes from within, not from external sources. The more we seek happiness in others, the more we suffer when they fail to meet our expectations. In Zen Buddhism, monks practice detachment, not because they reject love, but because they understand that everything is impermanent. People's attention, affection, and time will always fluctuate. And resisting this reality only causes pain. You yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection. The Buddha. Jeanne's suffering wasn't caused by her daughter ignoring her. It was caused by her belief that her daughter was responsible for her emotional happiness. Even the wealthiest and most successful individuals have learned the dangers of emotional dependence. Take Bill Gates. Despite building one of the most influential companies in history, he has always emphasized personal growth and self-reliance. After his divorce from Melinda, instead of falling into despair, he continued to focus on philanthropy, learning, and personal fulfillment. He understood that his happiness couldn't be dependent on a single person, no matter how important they once were in his life. Similarly, Oprah Winfrey grew up longing for approval from others but eventually realized that true self-worth must come from within. She once said, "If you're looking for someone to fix you, to make you feel whole, you'll always be searching." If dependence leads to suffering, how can we free ourselves? Find purpose outside of others. Jeanne could have explored hobbies, joined community groups, or engaged in spiritual practice rather than relying on her daughter for companionship. Accept that love does not mean constant attention. Just because someone is busy does not mean they have stopped caring. Cultivate inner fulfillment. Meditation, self-reflection, and personal growth help us become our own source of happiness. In the end, emotional independence does not mean isolation, it means finding balance so that our joy is not dictated by the actions of others. Chapter 5, The Path to True Inner Peace. The solution to old age suffering does not lie in forcing our children to take care of us but in finding peace within ourselves. Mr. Lin, like many elderly parents, believed that physical closeness to his children would ensure emotional closeness. But after experiencing loneliness despite being near his son, he realized that true happiness could not come from external relationships alone. Instead of waiting for his son's attention, he started to cultivate inner peace through self-reliance and personal fulfillment. Rather than sitting in isolation, longing for validation from his family, Mr. Lin chose to take control of his own well-being. He began practicing mindfulness every morning to calm his mind, engaging in hobbies he had long forgotten, like painting and gardening, and building new friendships in his community, creating a support system outside of his family. He also helped younger generations by mentoring students, passing on his wisdom and knowledge. By shifting his focus, his suffering faded. He no longer depended on his son to bring him happiness, he created his own. Even the most powerful individuals have faced emotional isolation and had to learn self-reliance to find true peace. Take Barack Obama, for example. As one of the most influential leaders in the world, he often had to navigate the pressures of leadership alone. Despite having a loving family, he practiced meditation and personal reflection to maintain emotional balance. His ability to find peace within himself was key to his resilience. Similarly, Warren Buffett, one of the wealthiest people in history, has often emphasized the importance of self-contentment. Despite his immense success, he lives a simple life, enjoys playing the ukulele, and spends time doing what he loves, because he understands that true happiness comes from within, not from wealth or validation from others. Buddhism teaches that happiness is an inside job. It is not given to us by our children, our spouses, or society. It is something we cultivate through wisdom, detachment, and self-awareness. Peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. The Buddha. Mr. Lin's suffering ended the moment he let go of expectations and embraced the present moment. He no longer saw his son's lack of attention as a betrayal. Instead, he understood that his son had his own life to live. If we want to find true inner peace, we must stop waiting for others to make us happy. Happiness is something we create, not something we receive. We must find purpose beyond family roles and engage in activities that bring joy, fulfillment, and connection with others. Let go of resentment and accept that our loved ones have their own paths. And their absence does not mean they do not care. We must develop spiritual and emotional independence. Whether through meditation, personal reflection, or meaningful work. Learning to be at peace with ourselves. Mr. Lin's journey is a reminder that we are responsible for our own happiness. And when we stop looking for it in others, we finally find it within. Chapter 6, Letting Go and Finding Freedom. When Mr. Lin stopped expecting his son to fulfill his emotional needs, something incredible happened. His relationship with his son began to transform. The burden of unspoken expectations that had once weighed down their interactions was now lifted. Without the constant pressure of obligation, their conversations became more genuine and enjoyable. The natural flow of love was restored, untainted by the demands of fulfilling a role. This shift highlights a profound truth about relationships, the freedom that comes from letting go. In modern society, many of us, especially in family dynamics, operate under the weight of expectations. We expect our loved ones, particularly our children, to meet our emotional needs, believing that their love should come with an unspoken duty to care for us as we age. This mindset, however, often leads to disappointment and frustration. The expectation itself becomes a barrier to genuine connection. The Buddha's teaching, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without, points to the importance of internal peace over external validation. The more we hold on to expectations, the more we trap ourselves in cycles of suffering. Mr. Lin's realization that his happiness didn't depend on his son's actions freed him from this trap. He stopped holding his son to an emotional standard, allowing their relationship to evolve naturally and without pressure. This concept of letting go is not just limited to family dynamics. It can be applied across all areas of life. Take the case of Oprah Winfrey. For instance, she has often spoken about how, throughout her life, she had to let go of her past, including the expectations of others. Oprah realized that true freedom came when she stopped allowing others' opinions or obligations to define her path. Her success and emotional well-being stem from her ability to let go of what she couldn't control and focus on creating a life aligned with her true self. Similarly, Nelson Mandela exemplified the power of letting go during his long imprisonment. Despite enduring 27 years behind bars, Mandela chose to release his bitterness and resentment towards his oppressors. His capacity to forgive and move beyond expectations enabled him to lead South Africa toward peace and reconciliation. The lessons from these powerful figures reveal a universal truth: letting go of expectations leads to freedom, the freedom to enjoy life as it is, not as we think it should be. For Mr. Lin, this meant embracing his own independence and self-sufficiency. Finding joy in small moments, like reading a book, practicing calligraphy, or even enjoying the sunrise each morning. He didn't rely on his son to bring him happiness. Instead, he built his own sense of peace, which, in turn, strengthened his connection with his son. True happiness in old age, then, doesn't lie in where we live or how close we are to others, but in how we choose to live. Letting go of attachment to the outcome of our relationships and focusing on the freedom that comes with self-reliance opens the door to true joy. As we come to the end of today's discussion, let's remember the true legacy we leave behind. The greatest gift we can give our children is not the burden of our unmet expectations, but the wisdom of inner peace. Mr. Lin, Madame Jeanne, and countless others learned this lesson the hard way, but you don't have to. You have the power to change the narrative of your own life. Instead of waiting for love, cultivate it within yourself. Instead of clinging to the past, embrace the present. Instead of seeking validation from the outside world, find contentment in solitude. The greatest mistake we can make in old age is believing that our happiness depends on others. The truth is, happiness is an inside job. When we realize that, we free ourselves from the chains of dependency and expectation, and we open the door to true peace and fulfillment. If you've made it this far, I invite you to reflect on this wisdom in your own life. Do you agree? Have you or someone you know experienced something similar? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you're interested in exploring more deep insights on Zen, Buddhism, and personal transformation, make sure to subscribe to Peaceful Horizons. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you for watching. And until next time, stay peaceful.